My name is Lennon Hayes. I lost everything. My money, my job, my family, all gone. How did it happen? Well, let me tell you. It's not a short story, but if you've got time, I'll take you through it. Maybe you'll learn something from my mistakes, or maybe you'll just see how fast life can turn on you when you chase the wrong things. I grew up in a little town in Alabama, the kind of place most people never leave. We had one main street, a diner where everybody knew your name, and a high school football team that was the pride of the whole county. Life was slow, predictable. Some folks liked it that way. They'd spend their whole lives fixing cars, running farms, or working at the mill, and never once dream of leaving. But I wasn't like that. My daddy was a mechanic, hands always black with grease, and my mama cleaned houses to make ends meet. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Still, when I was a kid, I used to stare at magazines in the barber shop. Pictures of New York, skyscrapers glistening in the sun, men in sharp suits stepping out of shiny cars. To me, those pictures looked like another planet. I'd sit on the porch on hot summer nights, listening to the cicadas hum, and I'd tell myself, one day I'll be there. One day I'll trade these dirt roads for concrete streets, these rusty trucks for limousines. After high school, most of my buddies either joined the military, stayed to work in town, or started families young. Not me. I wanted out. I saved every dollar I could from odd jobs, hauling lumber, pumping gas, changing oil at my dad's shop. By the time I turned 20, it was the spring of 2000, and I had just enough to buy a one-way bus ticket to New York. I'll never forget the look on my mama's face when I told her. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Don't forget where you came from." Daddy just grunted, half proud, half worried. The bus ride felt endless. Miles and miles of fields, highways, and nameless towns flashing by. I barely slept. My head was full of dreams, bright lights, sharp suits, fast money. When I finally stepped off that bus in Manhattan, it was like stepping onto another planet. The noise hit me first. Car horns, shouting, footsteps pounding the pavement. Then the smell. Hot dogs, gasoline, trash, and perfume all mixed together. And the buildings, God, those buildings. They scraped the sky, higher than anything I'd ever seen. I was terrified, but I was also alive. The first few weeks were rough. I rented the cheapest room I could find in a run-down building where the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbors arguing. I lived on cheap sandwiches and instant noodles. Job hunting wasn't easy either. Nobody cared that I was willing to work hard. They wanted experience, and I had none. Then I stumbled onto Wall Street. I didn't know much about finance back then, but I knew this was the place, the heart of money, power, and success. Men and women in suits rushed past me with purpose, talking into their phones, carrying briefcases like they held the secrets of the universe. I stood there on the corner, staring, thinking, I don't know how, but this is where I'm meant to be. Of course, no one was going to hand me a job just because I had big dreams. The only position I could get was as a janitor in one of those big firms. A mop in my hand, a gray uniform on my back. At first, it felt humiliating. I'd left home chasing skyscrapers, and here I was scrubbing toilets. But then something shifted inside me. Every morning, I pushed my mop across the polished marble floors, pretending I belonged. Every night, I emptied trash cans stuffed with financial reports, crumpled notes, and newspapers. And instead of throwing them away, I started reading. Stock charts, business columns, scribbled figures. Half of it looked like a foreign language, but little by little, I began to understand. I was invisible to the brokers, just the janitor from Alabama. But I didn't care. I was inside the building, and for me, that was the first step. And I promised myself it wouldn't be the last. Being a janitor on Wall Street might not sound like much, but for me, it was like standing at the gates of a kingdom. I was still an outsider, still sweeping floors and wiping fingerprints off glass doors. But every day, I watched how the game was played. The trading floor was like a battlefield. Phones rang non-stop, men in suits barked orders, and the numbers on the screens moved faster than my eyes could follow. At first, I didn't understand a damn thing. It was just noise, words, and symbols that made no sense. But I listened. I listened hard. When I cleaned desks at night, I'd see scribbled notes on notepads, things like short sell, margin, NASDAQ. I started writing those words down in a little notebook I kept in my pocket. Later, in my tiny rented room, I'd look them up in old textbooks from the library. Some nights I stayed until sunrise, my brain burning from trying to make sense of it all. Most of the brokers didn't even know my name. To them, I was just, "Hey, janitor." They'd brush past me without a second glance. But one guy noticed, Eddie. Eddie wasn't the richest or the flashiest broker in the firm. He was middle of the pack, the kind of guy who worked hard but didn't show off. One day, around the fall of 2001, he caught me on my break reading a discarded copy of the Wall Street Journal. "You actually understand any of that, kid?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I swallowed hard. "Some of it." Instead of laughing, Eddie nodded. "Most rookies don't even bother. Keep at it." From that day on, Eddie talked to me. Not much at first, just small comments during his coffee breaks. But little by little, he started explaining things. He'd point at a chart and say, "See that dip? That's fear. The market's just fear and greed fighting each other." Or he'd tell me about a deal gone wrong, how a single bad call could cost millions. It was like being handed pieces of a puzzle. Eddie even gave me a couple of old finance books. Heavy stuff, full of words that twisted my tongue. But I devoured them. Every page, every chart, every example. I wasn't just sweeping floors anymore. I was studying for a future no one thought I could have. And Eddie wasn't the only source. I started paying attention to the secretaries, the clerks, even the way the brokers spoke on the phone. Their tone, their confidence, it was all part of the act. I mimicked them quietly, repeating phrases under my breath while I cleaned. I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I was preparing. Still, not everyone thought it was funny. Sarah, my wife, worried about me. We had married young, back in Alabama, before all this. She'd followed me to New York because she believed in me. But she hadn't signed up for a husband who spent every night buried in books and financial reports. "You're killing yourself over something that isn't even your job," she said one evening when I stumbled in, exhausted from a late shift. I tried to explain. "It's not just a job. It's a way out. If I can learn enough, if I can get a foot in the door..." She cut me off. "You already have a job and a wife. Maybe start remembering that." Her words stung, but I couldn't stop. I knew I was on the edge of something bigger. And then, one day, the break came. A clerk quit suddenly, walked out after an argument with the manager. Eddie looked over at me and said, "Why not give the kid a shot?" The manager laughed. "The janitor? You're kidding." But Eddie didn't back down. "Trust me, he's sharper than half the rookies we bring in." And just like that, I was pulled from the shadows and dropped at a desk with a phone, a list of numbers, and a chance. My hands shook as I dialed that first client. I was terrified, but more alive than I had ever been. That was the day I stopped being invisible. That first day at the desk, my palms were sweating so bad I could barely hold the phone. I had a list of names in front of me. People who had money, people who might invest if you said the right words. My job was simple: cold call them, pitch a stock, get them interested. It wasn't glamorous. Most of the time, I got hung up on before I could finish my first sentence. Some cursed me out, others laughed. By lunchtime, I'd struck out 20 times in a row. But I kept dialing. Eddie passed by and whispered, "Don't quit. Everyone fails the first 100 calls." So I kept going. My voice grew steadier, my pitch sharper. By the end of the week, I had my first small win, a retired teacher who bought a handful of shares. Barely anything compared to what the senior brokers were doing, but for me, it was a mountain climbed. When the confirmation came through, I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, and for the first time, I thought, I can really do this. The manager, who'd laughed at me earlier, just raised his eyebrows and muttered, "Not bad, kid." That was as close to a compliment as I was gonna get. From there, things moved fast. I threw myself into the work like a starving man at a feast. Every morning, I showed up before the others. Every night, I was the last to leave. My voice got stronger, my confidence grew. I studied market trends obsessively, sometimes staying up all night with financial reports spread across the kitchen table. But that obsession came with a price. At home, Sarah grew distant. She'd wait for me with dinner, only to see me stumble in late, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. I'd wave her off, grab a notebook, and keep studying. "You're never here," she told me one night. Her voice cracked. "Even when you are, you're not." I tried to explain, tried to make her see. "I'm building something for us. Don't you understand? We won't have to live paycheck to paycheck forever." She looked at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. "I didn't marry Wall Street. I married you, and I feel like I lost you already." I brushed it off at the time. Told myself she'd understand once I made it big. But deep down, a part of me knew I was losing her. At work, though, I couldn't stop. Every small win pushed me harder. I wanted bigger clients, bigger deals, bigger commissions. And slowly, I started to get them. The other brokers began to notice me, not as the janitor, not as Eddie's charity case, but as a competitor. One night, after I landed a client worth more than I'd ever imagined, Eddie took me out for a beer. He raised his glass and said, "You did it, kid. You're one of us now." I should have felt proud, and I did. God, I did. But there was something else, too, a hunger that gnawed at me. Being one of them wasn't enough. I didn't just want a seat at the table, I wanted the head of the table. And that hunger, that fire, it drowned out everything else. Sarah's voice, my exhaustion, even the warnings Eddie sometimes gave me. "Don't get greedy," he told me once. "That's when this place eats you alive." I nodded, pretended to agree. But inside, I thought, greed is the whole point. That was the start of my rise. And, though I didn't know it yet, the beginning of my fall. Once I got my foot in the door, it felt like the whole world opened up. Within a couple of years, by early 2000, I went from being that janitor kid to one of the firm's rising stars. My numbers were solid, my clients were growing, and my commissions started rolling in. For the first time in my life, I had money, real money. Not just enough to pay the rent or buy groceries, but enough to buy a car that turned heads when I drove down the street. Enough to take Sarah to fancy restaurants where the waiters wore tuxedos. Enough to look in the mirror and see someone who finally mattered. And I loved it. I loved the rush of closing a deal, the sound of a client saying yes, the feeling of watching my bank account swell. It was like a drug, and I couldn't get enough. The trading floor became my battlefield, my playground, my church. Every morning I walked in with my chest out, tie perfectly knotted, ready to conquer. But the more I won, the more I wanted. A $10,000 commission that once made me feel like a king started to feel small. I wanted bigger clients, riskier bets, faster payoffs. The hunger never stopped. At home, though, things were cracking. Sarah should have been happy. We had a nicer apartment now, nicer clothes, nicer everything. But instead of smiling, she frowned more than ever. "You think money fixes everything," she said one night, her voice cold. "But I don't want things, I want you, and you're never here." "I'm building this for us," I snapped back. "You think I enjoy working 16 hours a day? I'm trying to build a future."
"What kind of future is it if I lose my husband in the process?" I didn't have an answer, so I left for the office early the next day, like I always did. The truth was, I didn't know how to slow down. I was addicted, not just to the money, but to the status, the recognition. People who once ignored me now shook my hand, called me sir, asked for my advice. That felt better than any paycheck. But with success came temptation. Nights out with colleagues turned into long evenings of drinking, bragging, and making reckless bets. I found myself rubbing shoulders with people who thrived on excess, guys who gambled away thousands in a single night and laughed like it was nothing. Sometimes I told myself I was different, that I'd keep control. But then I'd make a trade too big, chase a client too hard, and when it paid off, the high was so strong, I forgot all the warnings. And the more I climbed, the less I listened to Eddie. He'd pull me aside and say, "Kid, be careful. Don't get in over your head. This street doesn't forgive mistakes." I'd nod, but inside I was thinking, mistakes are for losers. I'm not going to be one of them. By then, Sarah and I barely spoke. She wanted me to slow down, to think about starting a family, to live a normal life. But the thought of being normal terrified me more than anything. I told myself I was building something great, that I was doing it all for us. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't doing it for her. I wasn't doing it for us. I was doing it for me. And greed, once it gets its hooks in you, never lets go. The thing about success on Wall Street is you start believing you can't lose. You get so used to winning, so used to the money rolling in, that you start thinking you're smarter than the market itself. That was my mistake. By the mid-2000s, I was chasing bigger and bigger trades. I stopped caring about safe bets. Safe was boring. Safe didn't double your money overnight. Instead, I went after the riskiest plays, real estate investments, mortgage-backed securities, stocks that soared one week and crashed the next. I told myself I was being bold. I told my clients I was ahead of the curve. And for a while, I was. The money poured in, the commissions grew fatter, and my ego swelled until I thought nothing could touch me. But the thing about greed is, it blinds you. The first cracks appeared when one of my biggest clients pulled out suddenly. He'd lost faith in a deal I swore was golden. I tried to talk him down, but he walked. I brushed it off. One client doesn't sink a ship. Then another deal went south, and another. At first, I told myself it was bad luck, a temporary downturn. But the truth was staring me in the face. The market was turning, and I was too deep in to get out. The crash hit like a freight train. Stocks plummeted, portfolios bled red, and the phones that once brought in money now rang with furious clients demanding answers. I sat at my desk, headset on, listening to men and women scream at me, their voices full of rage and panic. "You told me this was safe," one shouted. "You ruined me," another cried. And there I was, Lennon Hayes, the kid from Alabama who thought he could outsmart Wall Street, sitting in the middle of a storm I had created. The losses piled up fast, millions gone in days. My own money, my clients' money, everything I had built. In a matter of weeks, the empire I'd worked years to create crumbled into dust. At home, Sarah had already checked out, long before the markets did. She barely looked at me when I walked through the door. One night, after another screaming match about my lies, my obsession, my failures, she packed her bags. "I can't do this anymore," she said, tears streaking her face. "I don't even know who you are." I begged her. I swore I'd change, that I'd quit, that I'd rebuild. But she shook her head. "You've already lost everything that mattered," she whispered. Then she left, and the sound of the door closing was louder than any market crash. Suddenly, I was alone. No wife, no money, no respect. Just debts, shame, and a hollow ache in my chest. I remember sitting in that empty apartment one night in the fall of 2008, staring at the city skyline through the window. All those glittering towers I had once dreamed of climbing now looked like tombstones. I realized I hadn't beaten the system. The system had chewed me up and spit me out, just like it had done to thousands before me. Eddie was right. Greed eats you alive, and it had devoured me completely. That was the moment I understood. I hadn't just lost my money, I had lost myself. And so, here I am, telling you this story after losing it all. My money, my career, my wife, gone. Not because I wasn't smart enough, not because I didn't work hard enough, but because I let greed and pride run my life. I came to New York with nothing but dreams. For a while, I thought I'd made it. I rose higher than I ever imagined. But somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was and where I came from. I traded love for ambition, traded peace for chaos, and in the end, the street took back everything it gave me. Sometimes I think about Alabama, the quiet nights, the cicadas, the life I left behind. Maybe I could have been happy there. Maybe happiness was never about skyscrapers or bank accounts. If you're listening to this, maybe you're chasing the same dream I did. Let me tell you, be careful. Chase success, but don't lose yourself in the process. Because once it's gone, once everything's gone, all you're left with is regret. That's my story.